Welcome back to our Simple Healthy Life podcast, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. And before the podcast, we were just kind of talking a little bit about change and mindset. And you mentioned a gentleman named Alfred Adler came into your purview recently. And for those of you that don't know, he is a psychologist from the early 1900s, right around that same Freud time frame, a little bit before Jung. And one of the things that got him taken out of mainstream psychology was that he believed that, was it that there's no such thing as trauma, or is it that trauma didn't have an effect on you as an individual?
Yeah, so Adler or Adlerian psychology, his basic premise, the one that was rejected, was that trauma wasn't real in the way that we see it, right? And so it wasn't the fact that he would deny that trauma existed in a person. It's that he felt that trauma didn't define us, right? He felt that our response to trauma was really what defined us, and that we could respond to trauma, and that we had, this creative self where we could kind of choose our path rather than being kind of controlled by the subconscious, which at the time, with the Freudian era, Freud's whole premise was that we really were kind of controlled subconsciously, right? And Freud's big claim to fame was the sexual kind of like subconscious, driven by sexual drives and desire, and kind of this hedonistic kind of approach almost. And so he was kind of written off for that. But I think beyond the superficial idea of like trauma isn't real or however, which is very clickbaity, right? I think his ideas are really nice. They're nice to learn about.
So hold on. So he was saying essentially that it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond.
Yes.
And they said, we don't like that, you're out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So could it be said that maybe his ideas are coming full circle? Because I live in a world now where I believe that that's more accurate.
Yeah. To me, it's interesting because, of course, when we talk about trauma, and it's so impactful on how people are, right? And it certainly impacts people. And I think that's, it's obviously very true. I work with a lot of people who have had significantly traumatic backgrounds, right? But I also don't want to believe that defines them. And I think even if it is idealistic, I think it's helpful for someone to believe that trauma doesn't define them, whether it does or whether it doesn't. I mean, I think the general accepted premise is that, yeah, trauma does almost define you in some way. I think it's limiting to people's growth, right? To have maybe like an abusive upbringing, and then say, well, you're more likely to become the abuser in the future. Although studies showing that that's true, likely to be true, it removes a lot of the agency.
Well, as soon as you give that up, as soon as you give up that autonomy, aren't you, in essence, you're playing the victim?
Yeah, that was his thing too. Is that he believed people would play victim. They would choose to be the victim. Essentially, they would choose to make that part of themselves, because there's a reason why. There's power in being a victim, right? If you felt that you were a victim, you felt that things happened to you and brought you down to this place of tremendous inferiority, that the best place or the best action for you in that moment, or one action for you in that moment to gain power, would be to be a victim, right? And think about, I think I've talked about this before, is that think about being a child, right? Who is more powerful than a toddler or a baby? completely inferior in every single way, it is totally dependent. It has all the power in the world, right? For the most part,
Right.
right?
So I'd like to explore this a little bit deeper because it gets into something that I've been exploring for my own self. Whether it is or isn't trauma that defines you, and I'm going to say that it isn't, if you're really looking at each individual as a whole, so your whole self, and this is going to be very difficult for a lot of people, and it's very difficult for me too, to be accepting of your whole self. And there's all these parts of us that we show the outside world, and then there's all these parts of us that we hold within. And let's face it, if we had our choice, we would hold that trauma inside. People would never know that you had this horrible event happen to you, or even just the things that bothered you on the inside. Those are all little, trauma, little t. But if once we become accepting of our whole self, I think then we can move on and do what we're talking about here, which is, not let it define you, or what did I say earlier, right? It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. I think that this kind of ties into some of our previous conversations about stoicism and areas where we have to, as a person, start to appreciate ourselves as a whole person.
Right.
And not just look at the other people around us, because all you're seeing from those people are the faces that they choose you to see, right? And then take it one step further. We live in a society now where 90% of what we interact with is on a screen, and every single piece of that information that's coming at you has been manipulated in some way. So we're losing touch with the fact that we are all trauma little t. We all have trauma big T. And I think Adler was onto it. I think he knew that it didn't define you, but it was in there. And I think that's the part that maybe people miss when he says, it didn't define you, or it wasn't real, right?
Right.
It's just part of who you are.
Yeah. There's been some discussions lately, and it's nice that you said, well, is it coming full circle? Because I've seen a lot of discussions on how a lot of modern therapeutic intervention is focusing on that past. And, I want everyone to feel validated by their, the things that happen to them, because to your point, it is a part of you and we should accept that. But at some point, we need to be forward thinking, and we need to look into the creative self and how then we can, make the changes necessary to move beyond those, those real low points. And it doesn't really help to ruminate on the past. It is helpful to accept the past. It's helpful for integrating the past. It's helpful to, feel validated on, hey, you had some really rough things happen. That must have been very hard for you. But the continued kind of rumination on that, I think, is what then leads to being defined by it. And a lot of recent, I guess the conversation is almost steering to, why are we doing that so much, and why are we focusing less on the future, which I guess really is the Adlerian kind of thought process is coming full circle, because his whole thing was to think forward, to be creative, to acknowledge, but let's move on and let's see how we can allow the future to define us.
Yeah, well said. And I think that is, well, it's number one, it's the way that I want to live my life, right? It's the way I want to set goals that are based on future. I want to, what was his other form of therapy? It was basically like positive psychology, right?
Encouragement.
Like, encouragement, right? Encourage good behavior. And I know we're kind of making something that is very challenging sound very simple,
right.
But encouraging good behavior, setting goals for a future self, while acknowledging that something did happen in the past, is the way that I would choose to go about it. In fact, it's funny. Some people ask me sometimes, they go, Mike, how come you're not a therapist? Because I spent a lot of time working with mental health. And my reason was always, I didn't enjoy the looking in the past. I enjoy working through the future. So when people will come to me and say, hey, I have X, Y, or Z, or I'm really challenged by X, Y, or Z, my answers are almost always Adlerian, right? They're encouraging, and they're looking towards behavior that we can engage in to the future. And now to know, as we did this exercise, that it was shunned. Right? He was like kind of thrown out in the early 1900s in favor of the original Freudian, right, which is that essentially sex is what drives us, whether or not you had trauma or not.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an interesting concept.
That's wild.
Are you familiar at all with Carl Jung or his work?
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah. I just finished the Red Book. Are you familiar with this book?
Yeah, I've been wanting to read it. Can I borrow that?
Yes, absolutely. Cool thing about this, and it speaks to kind of the way that our psychology has evolved. He spent essentially his life's work was studying his own subconscious. And interestingly enough, it's probably just as hard as you might think it is to do, right? Dreams and symbols and writing and meditation. But when he finished, he asked that this book not be published for many years after his death, because he was afraid that the current situation, the current state of the state would discredit him. And knowing now that he died almost 30 years after Freud and Adler, there's no doubt they would have discredited him.
Oh, yeah.
But now I think it's time. Now the world is ready for this. Now the world's ready for a new understanding of what's going on in the human brain, in the human psyche, and it's ready for Adler's theories to come full circle. It's ready for Carl Jung's theories on subconscious to come out. And whereas there's no doubt that it just was not ready for it before.
Yeah. It is interesting. Oftentimes we're not ready for a lot of these newer insights, and we're not ready, as in the society as a whole is not ready for newer insights. But I think the takeaway that I like from all these different ideas is that I think they all have their pros, right? There's things to grasp from Adlerian or Freudian or Jungian kind of like psychology, and it's nice to just learn about, right? And that's what I try to do. I try to just go learn about these different modalities and see what feels accurate to me, what feels like it's relevant to me in my life, and then trying it out, right? Even like some of the modern therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy, like ACT, or like DBT, which is basically tolerating uncomfortable emotions. There's great aspects of all of those, right? But I don't think any one modality or any one idea really encompasses the whole being.
Well said. I agree. And I like that one of the reasons I enjoy talking to you so much is that you are interested in just learning these different things, learning the different, just learning. And I think that the more we learn, the more we can share, and the more that we can throw ideas out there. And none of them have to be, don't have to take anything specific, but I didn't expect to talk about this, but I would like to see if I can articulate something that was in the Red Book that I think is very apropos. I'm going to use that word again later for today. And what Jung talks about in his book, see if I can articulate this well enough so that you understand it. If not, we'll just drop it and we'll cut it, I guess. He talks about that we have two parts to our subconscious. Okay. We have our individual subconscious, which is essentially made up of all of the stuff that happens in your life.
Sure.
And that doesn't really need much more of a definition.
Sure.
But this guy lived during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes that we have a collective subconscious
Mm-hmm.
that is affected by the collective,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that you're in an environment during a world war, and your behavior will actually change unbeknownst to you to mirror or reflect this environment that you're in that is not of your choosing. I think it's incredibly interesting because we have now lived through two interesting events. One of them was COVID, and I believe that, I don't want to say it was weaponized. Our selective subconscious was weaponized. I don't think that was the accurate, but I think that there's some feeling there that could, I think we all have a feeling there about what happened.
Sure.
And then I think the second one was as recent as this last election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you were engaged in paying attention to that, whether it doesn't matter what side you were on, you picked a side. You had an opinion. You had a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
People that ordinarily couldn't care less because everybody around them was so hive-minded, riled up, there was some level of collective unconscious happening there. Right. Does that make sense? Did I articulate that well?
Yeah, perfect. Well said. Yeah, I believe it to be true. I also think I think he even extended beyond the ideas, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the ideas of the environmental subconscious, like this collective subconscious in regards to the environment. But I think he even proposed that there is an esoteric vibe to that collective subconscious too, which, is interesting, right? And that is stuff, such as thoughts influencing reality or downloads, right? These kinds of very esoteric terms. And I think that's why he probably said, well, let's publish this book long after I'm gone. I don't want to deal with the questions at the cookout.
Right. Yeah, I think he was right to. I think he was right to. And I would say that there's some studies coming out now, and there's one guy in particular, and his name won't come to me today, so I'll just drop it. But essentially, his theories are now that your brain is essentially works the same way as the other sensory organs that you have in your body. And so we're sensing hot and cold, we're sensing our vision, we're sensing the vibration that gives you the ability to hear. We are essentially sensing something else when we have these thoughts of inspiration, or we have the muse, as they say, right? Artists talk about the muse all the time. Like, it didn't come from me; it flowed through me. And he's essentially saying that nobody's ever looked up and said, "There's a memory in your brain. It's flowing in and out at all times." And because it's on the inside of our skull, we think, well, that can't possibly be true, right? It doesn't have any interaction with the outside world. But why not?
Yeah, and that's a thought that I've thunk.
I think about it sometimes.
Yeah, it's especially prevalent with artists, musicians. This kind of inspiration that seems to come out of nowhere. One of the things that I'm really trying to do lately is I recognize that we think too much, especially as we're doing, right? It's like I'm playing music and I'm also sometimes, not all the time, sometimes I'm thinking too consciously. And those are the times where it doesn't feel quite right. But other times where I'm just breathing. I'm breathing and I'm truly being the music, where I have these really great kind of like compositions just pop up out of nowhere. And nothing maybe super remarkable on my end, but I think the more that we're able to breathe and allow the subconscious mind to do its thing, the better. right? It's the reason why people will, musicians and artists will go to bed and have this just dream of this amazing song, and they somehow remember it and somehow then translate that to paper and then to song and then to recording. And some of the most popular songs today have been downloaded, so to speak. And it could be as esoteric as it coming from aliens, right? It coming from a higher being or another dimension. It could be that way, or it could just be the brain being the brain, and the brain is remarkably complex, and still nothing really is known about it. It's not known. Maybe 10% is known about the whole brain, and it's just so complex that it could be a fine process to be happening up there, but for the most part, it seems esoteric. It seems wild. It seems crazy.
Are you familiar with Israel? They call him Is? He's the 600-pound Hawaiian guy that wrote "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Mm-hmm. Have you heard this story? Yeah. He woke up in the middle of the night, went down, called the studio, said, "I need to record this." Went down and did it in one take, start to finish, and that you can listen to that right now, and didn't do anything else. Yeah. Another example, really strange example, but just came to my mind. Did you happen to see the Eagles game on Sunday?
I didn't.
Did you see Saquon Barkley jump over the dude backwards?
I did see that. Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, amazing.
Right? You don't think I'm going to jump over the dude backwards, right? No. Like, you want to see a great example of just being or being inspired. Watch two black belts scramble. Mm-hmm. Right? At the end, the really cool part is they can actually tell you what it was they did, but in the moment, they're not telling you what they're doing or what they're doing next or how it's going to play out.
It just flows.
It just flows. And I think we all have examples of that where we know that call it your subconscious, right? Call it your being in the moment, call it your esoteric, whatever you want. We all have an example of that in our life. And we just recorded this podcast on passion. And when you're passionate about something and you spend so many hours just doing it without concern about the outcome, just doing it, eventually that flow comes in. And whether that flow is, again, from your subconscious or not, we don't know. But I think there's something there. And far be it from us to explain it to everybody now, but learning about it certainly is fun.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, the engaging with that flow experience brings out the complexities of the subconscious mind and the creation that's available, right? And yeah, again, it sounds wild, but the truth is that this is, it's almost reproducible. You go into jiu-jitsu or music or drawing or painting, singing, podcasting, conversations, whatever it is, and you trust that you've done all that you can do to prepare for those moments, and you breathe, chances are you're doing much better than if you have a lot of conscious input there. And that's what's hard for the beginner in any area, is that the beginner needs this kind of conscious input. They don't know what they're doing. There's no kind of muscle memory or mental muscle memory involved in that at all. It hasn't grown yet. And so once you get beyond those beginner stages and you start getting into, the deeper stages of mastery, then it's your job to breathe through the skill or the event or the activity and allowing creation to happen. Right? No matter how, no matter what you're doing, even in these kind of conversations, it's easy for us to get tripped up if we're thinking too much. We've already done studying and research and preparation and already have facilitated conversations. So it's not our job right now to be thinking. It's our job right now to be breathing and letting the flow happen. Right?
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. And when you're in that environment where you are doing essentially what you're talking about, the job of just thinking, just breathing and happening, don't you feel good?
It's so good.
Don't you feel better?
It's the best moments.
It really is. And to bring this back towards the brain, one of the things that I've learned, I was taught and learned, so I was on the lookout for it, which is rare for me because usually it's the opposite. Usually something happens and I'm like, holy crap, what was that? I got to figure it out. Is that the more you practice meditation, and I'm going to define meditation right now as just allowing your higher level thinking to rest. We can also talk about how that works if you want, but the more you practice meditation, the more often you'll have what they call sporadic flow moments. So this ability to just breathe and do and be will come back up sporadically. And I don't like the word sporadic because it feels like, sporadic. Random. I would say that I've come full circle to say you're actually practicing it by allowing yourself that time with your eyes closed in a dark room, laying on the floor, whatever it is. You are practicing being in the moment. And when you practice being in the moment, just like when you practice anything else, it's going to come back and pay dividends. And sometimes those dividends are that you can recognize the moment and that you can be calm, or you can, all the things that we want to use it for. But other times it's just that feeling of, man, this is a lot of fun. This is just great. I can do this. I'm happy. I'm excited. The temperature feels perfect. I'm here. And it's just a great reason for people that don't have a good enough reason to practice meditation. It's a great one. And it goes back to our boy Adler. Mm-hmm. Right? He says, let's work on the whole person. All right. Let's work on the fact that, yes, every one of us has some trauma. Yes, every one of us has some good. Yes, we all have it. Let's work on the whole person from a forward-thinking perspective.
Right. And it's so powerful, too, because I feel that so many people feel stuck. And you and I both work with plenty of people who feel stuck. And they've even taken great steps by reaching out and facilitating the role of mentor, right? They found kind of like a mentor, which is great. But even then they feel kind of stuck. And it's hard to say for some people why that is. And I think a lot of it comes down to they don't feel that they have locus of control. They don't feel like they have agency over their lives. They don't feel that they can actually make a difference or make a change. And so, one of Adler's ideas in which he says that you're always making a decision, essentially. If you feel that you're stuck, he argues that you almost want to be stuck, right? And, there are circumstances there, I'm sure. But for many of us, especially if we're listening to this podcast, there's plenty of opportunities out there.
Absolutely. I get frustrated with these like black and whites, these haves and have-nots. And he might be right. It could actually be that black and white, and we just haven't got deep enough into our decision-making process. But when we're learning about it or trying to figure it out, let's leave some gray area. Let's leave some area for ourselves to again be a real person, right? No, maybe we are stuck and we don't want to acknowledge the fact that some of it is our own choosing, and maybe there's some stuff that we just can't seem to battle through. But to find a mentor is going to help you with that. Sure. And I will say I do like his concept. I do believe that it is not what defines you is not what happens to you. What defines you is what you do about it and what happens to you. Be a whole person. Yeah. Be mind, body, spirit. Be conscious and subconscious. Know that there's some elements to you that you don't necessarily have control over at the beginning. Like these thoughts that come in that we all have that are intrusive, maybe they don't come from you. Maybe they do come from some esoteric place, but we all have them. And that's part of being a whole person. Don't push them away, right? Have you done any research or done any, maybe we'll do a podcast on shadow work or, and are you familiar with this term?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. And for the audience out there, shadow work is essentially the parts of you that you don't want to show, the parts of you that you don't want to face, the things that, you did the wrong thing. And maybe, you did the wrong thing on purpose, right? How tough is that to deal with later on? You have to figure out, you have to sit down and say, I can shove this down and say, no, 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 no. Or I can say, acknowledge, yep, that's what happened. That's what I did. This is when I did it. And really face your shadows. Because the whole concept here is that if you don't, your shadow will be there forever. It'll stay with you. And if you do, then you can start to release it.
Yeah. It's so powerful, right? To be able to be accepting, kind of what you said earlier, be accepting of the whole self, the things that happen to you, the things that you're doing, the things that will happen to you, who you are, what your character traits are like. Accepting all of that is kind of a task.
Heck yeah, especially when you have this desire to be perfect, or you see what other people want to show you as perfect, or you're on social media all day pretending, looking at people that are pretending to be perfect, right? We know inherently that we all have these shadows, we all have these challenges, we all have stuff that didn't go right, but we don't want to accept it.
Right.
Self-acceptance is at the core of all of this stuff that we seem to be talking about pretty consistently. And maybe it's part of why people listen.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think there's also like a realness to it, right? One of the most harmful things that people do is they often compare themselves to people who are the best in their field, right? Or the best at speaking, or the best at acting or singing or music, right? We have so much access to those people, which is great. One of my favorite musicians, Victor Wooten, is a bass player, amazing bass player, one of the most influential bass players in history. And he always talks about how when he was learning bass, he didn't have access to just like go on YouTube and look up a musician. He didn't even have access to like good television at that time, and so he would have to wait for the weekly prime time TV appearance that sometimes would have a musician, or wait years for them to come around, his idols to come around. And those were big moments. But now we have this, incessant almost access to people better than us. And we feel the need to compare to that. And then that leaves us with this feeling of inferiority, which is maybe natural, but almost overdone a lot of the times, and then you try to do anything and you think, well, that person's already there doing it. Even for us in podcasting, there's so many quote unquote better podcasters. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that we're the best at it, but we're doing it. And I think eventually over time, that's how you get better, is by doing the thing. We always preach that the action is so important. Doing something is so important. There's so many distractions and things that pull our attention away, and we're always trying to multitask, and none of that is helpful. When we can sit there and do a singular action for even 30 minutes at a time will be really, really helpful. Taking a topic and discussing it for 45 minutes is really, really helpful, because it helps solidify your ideas, it helps express ideas, and we're doing it in public, and something about that makes it very real as well. And so, if anything, trying that. Actually, I have a good story for you. I don't know if it's that good, but I'll
be
you
the
story.
judge of that.
I have this friend at jiu-jitsu, and he took a little bit of a break. He went through a tough time that I now know of. Went through a tough time, kind of like a depressive episode, and he took a little bit of break. He wasn't there for a little while, and he comes back one day. I'm like, hey man, it was nice to see you. Like, nice to roll, nice to catch up. And he starts sharing that, well, I've had this really tough time, and I have all the things. I have the wife, I have the kids, I have the house, I have a good job, but something just doesn't feel right. Like, I'm missing something. And I think the natural path for him in those dark moments was alcohol, and he was drinking a lot and feeling very down and depressed and shameful because of that. So, he comes back, he tries to pull himself up and do the actions that he knows that he likes to do, jujitsu. And then we were talking a little bit more, and I asked him, well, what are some other things that you like to do? And he's like, well, I like writing. I like poetry. I'm like, that's great. Have you done that? No, I haven't really been getting into it too much. Okay. Well, you should do that. I would love to read it. And we hadn't talked about this actual topic like face to face, him and I, afterwards, but he actually opened up a Substack and started writing a little bit of his poetry every day. And it's amazing. It's really great. It's really great. And so to see someone who, recognizes, ooh, I'm kind of in a tough spot, but then instead of ruminating or complaining about it or whatever, taking actions. And none of these things are easy to do, right? Getting to jujitsu when you feel bad is really hard. Talking to people when you feel down is really hard. Writing and putting that out, especially writing poetry and putting that out for the public to see, is really hard. It's really uncomfortable. But I'd venture to say that he's in so much better of a spot, and he will continue to be in a better spot as long as he continues those actions.
I love that. And good for you for being you. I'm sure that a large part of why he was willing to open up to you is because of who you are and because you approach life in a certain way without judgment. And so many times we always want to have someone like yourself that we can talk to, right? We want to find someone, especially in our darkest times. So kudos to you and kudos to him for making that happen. And I like the idea that goes back to this whole self-acceptance. Sounds like he accepted the fact that he was a whole person. He had all the things, but he was missing something. Something was challenging him, so he still needed something else.
Right.
And that's a really tough place to be when, from the outside looking in, you appear to have all the things, but you internally know that you're not happy.
Right.
It's a scary place because I don't know. I don't want to say it's easier. It's easier when you're from the outside saying, I don't have this, I don't have that. And other people are like, yeah, well, geez, good for you for pulling yourself up because you didn't have this and you didn't have that. But what about the people out there like him that are like, no, I have all the things, but it's just not doing it for me.
It's a lonely place to be.
It's a lonely place to be.
Thought about that. How like when you are trying to better yourself and improve your quality of life and escape the realities that those things that we're told make us happy don't really truly make us happy. It's a lonely place to walk the path and say, I have to pursue something that I actually do like. I have to pursue something more meaningful. And then you walk that path and no one's there for you. You're going to have a couple people supporting you, but the vast majority of people will look at your situation and be like, well, you got the house, you got the job, you got the wife, you got the kids, you're fine.
Yeah, what are you doing? That's so stupid.
Right.
Don't do that.
There's a reason why they also say that those who are exceptionally wealthy are not honest about their true current state of affairs in terms of their mental well-being or happiness or joy, because they're usually smart enough to know that they should be grateful for what they have. And so everything then, every interview, every question is overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, I'm super happy. It's great. Life is great because I should be. Right? I should be happy, right? Because I have all the money in the world. I have all these opportunities, so I should be happy. So that's what I'm going to say. And yet, maybe they're not. Maybe they've pursued things that just have no actual purpose behind them, and that's a tough place to be, to walk the path of purpose kind of alone.
Yeah, really well said, and a lot of that resonates with me right now.
Yeah.
Well, I I think that's a good place to stop. I appreciated this conversation. I think that I took a lot away from it today. I definitely can tell you that I'm a fan of the Adler style. I treat the whole person. I don't know whether I care whether or not he believes trauma is real or not, but I do believe that if you are going to treat the whole person, trauma is involved, and the way you react to it's involved, and what you do, how you set goals, and the way you want to approach life in the future is involved. I'm not up to speed on the Freudian stuff, and I can't say as though I truly agree with the fact that sex makes all of our decisions for us.
Yeah.
But I will definitely say that I'm excited to learn more about the young psychology and the psychology of the subconscious. And that's what I took away from today.
Great. Yeah, likewise. Good conversation. Okay. And you can find us on most podcast platforms, including Spotify. And if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about or have, certain curiosities yourself, please drop us a comment and we will be gladly available to talk about them. And if you're interested in joining the show for a conversation, please direct message either MJ or myself, and you can find our Instagram handles down below. Thanks.